I just completed my first holiday market and I feel like I have a lot to share about it. Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm an amateur potter, and if you're a beginner potter like me looking to dive into the market space, then this is the video for you. So to say that this is my first market is a little bit of a lie. I technically did one about a year ago at a berry farm where I sold mini pots. But I sold a whopping 7 pots, the majority of which were bought by my parents. So I feel like I've now seen the very high highs and low lows of the market life, and just overall how it can be a very humbling experience. So after my first one was a flop, I kind of swore off markets, but my studio was hosting their first annual market, so I decided to open my heart to selling my work again, and I'm so glad that I did. So now that I have a successful market under my belt, I decided to make this video for other beginners, both on things to consider when planning your work and for the actual market prep itself. So without further ado, here's my tips for planning your work for markets. So tip number 1 that I have is to really consider your goals, because that's really going to impact how you're approaching the market. If your goal is to make a lot of money off of this, you're maybe going to want to make fewer high ticket items. But I kind of approach this as a side adventure, side quest, if you will. My goals were really to make a cohesive line of work. I've never really done that before. I've only made kind of one-off pieces and I've not really repeated techniques too often. And then my other goal was just to make things that I would be proud of and also that I would buy. I wanted stuff that I could show off to my family and friends, and I did want to sell a few more things than last time. So the money component was there, but it wasn't the thing that was most top of mind. So I'd get really honest with yourself about what you're wanting out of the market, and that way you can kind of plan around that. My second tip is to start super early. I wish I had started way earlier. My studio announced that they were doing a holiday market in September, but I was traveling for most of September. So I literally just had October to crank out everything and meet the bisque deadline. And I really had my sights set on making, I think, about 58 pieces. So it was a huge time crunch. So my advice to you would be, if you know that a market is coming down the line, plan months in advance. Start batching pieces out now. I wish I had, started over the summer, because then I could have baked in more time to make mistakes, flop pots, try out new glazes. There's just not a lot of time for experimentation when the timeline is so short and condensed. So I think with having some buffer time, it's a little bit less pressure, and you can also build in time for experimentation and mistakes. My third tip is to sketch everything out. I'm a super visual person. If you're a potter, I'm assuming you are too. Even if sketching isn't, your forte, I think it's a great way to plan out your pieces. So I kind of sketched my whole line. I wanted to have things tie in with certain motifs. So I wanted to visually see if everything was going to look cohesive together. And then it also helped me create a plan of attack. So I knew I wanted to make candle vessels. And for these vessels, it would be the cup. There was a sculptural element with an envelope. And then obviously I knew I needed to finish it and fill it with wax. So I was like, okay, that's one of the things that I need to start with first. So that kind of helped realize what pieces were going to be higher lift and which ones would be lower lift. And because I'm me, I also made a progress tracker so I could visually see, okay, here's my goal number of pieces, here's the number I've tackled so far. And that just helped keep me honest about if my timeline was realistic, if I needed to throw extra one week. So both of those things, I think both sketching and then having a progress tracker and kind of a schedule really helped to keep me on track to make my market deadline. I'll say the other thing that I wish I had done, and some of this is just baking in more time, is to make extras. So when I sketched everything out, I was like, okay, we're gonna make 6 candles, or maybe 8 candles was my goal. I should have made like 10 vessels, because you never know what's gonna happen in the kiln, if you're gonna accidentally bump something when trimming and kind of throw off the form. So that's another thing where I just didn't have time to bake in some of that extra quantity, but I really wish I had done that and think I would have felt a little bit better going into the market had I had a few extras. My next tip is to focus on quality over quantity. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to make a ton of pieces, but try not to compare yourself to other potters in your studio. At the end of the day, if you're a beginner like me, you're not a production potter. You don't have the capacity to churn out hundreds of pieces. So give yourself a little grace and stay in your own lane when it comes to comparison. And then just be honest with the quality of your work. Like, I felt like I needed a lot more stuff, so last minute I made a few mugs, and when they came out of the kiln, I just wasn't happy with them. They weren't up to my normal standard, they were kind of heavy, a few of them had chipped in the kiln, so I decided ultimately not to display them. And that's okay, you know, I think ultimately you want to be proud of what you're presenting. It doesn't matter how much stuff is actually on your table. My other tip is to offer variety. For my first market, I made sort of all the same type of pot. I just did color variations, but didn't really give me any data on what was resonating with people. So I think you should view your first market as you're just collecting a bunch of data of what people are interested in and what's popular. And often it's not what you think it's gonna be. I made these like bubble ring dishes that I was like, oh, these are cute. But I didn't think much of them, but they ended up kind of flying off my market shelf. So that was kind of neat to see. So I wound up offering candles, ornaments, ring dishes, earrings, necklaces, and then a few pots from my first market. And it was funny to see what did really well. So like I said, the ring dishes kind of flew off the shelves. The ornaments did really well too. I think anything that's, you know, small and kind of lower cost tends to do well. Candles sold okay. They were my highest ticket item in my booth, so I think, you know, that probably impacted how they sold. Earrings did great, and then necklaces not so much. So these are all things that I'm kind of gathering and analyzing and kind of thinking, okay, why did one sell really well but one didn't? So offering variety kind of gives you more input for when you tackle your next market. I think the other thing you'll want to consider is being unique and playing to your strengths. So one of the ways that I did this was that I said, okay, this is a holiday market, but I don't want to be like hit you over the head holiday. So I chose some motifs that might be generally holiday, like I did envelopes, I did bows, stars, tulips, which I guess like red and green, but not super holiday. And then my color palette was more of a nod to holiday, but still kind of whimsical and fun. And then the other thing was, okay, how do I be unique in what's on my table and what might other potters not have at their tables? So I thought my greeting cards in my ornaments and in my envelope cups were a really clever way to stand out. Making a candle felt like a fun way to stand out as well. I think only one other potter did that. And then no other potter did jewelry, so I thought that was kind of a unique addition as well. So, you know, it's not a competition. You can make the same things that other people are making, but maybe just think of a few things that might be unique to you that you can offer that no one else can. So that's everything I think you should consider when you're planning your work. And now I wanted to give a few tips about the actual market and the market presentation itself. So my first tip in market prep is to order display and packaging well ahead of time. It's easy to get caught up in the making of things that you forget, okay, I actually have to present and sell this stuff. So I made myself a little checklist. For this particular market, our studio handled bags, tables, and processing payments, but I knew I wanted a little bit of height on my table. I needed jewelry display cards and a way to hold those. I needed a way to price things. I needed some hardware and accessories to finish my pieces. I needed ribbon for ornaments. And then we also were required to provide a tablecloth. And then I'd recommend getting some different options to test out ahead of time. You never know what's gonna work or not. I ended up kind of measuring out the space that I had on my kitchen table and then trying out a bunch of different configurations. That way, when I got something that I knew I liked, I could take a picture of it, and then market setup was a breeze because all I had to do was reference that image. I also wanted to talk about pricing. So pricing your work is so hard. You put so much time and effort and energy into things, but then you also want to make sure that it's feasible for people to buy your stuff. So this was particularly hard for me as someone who hasn't really sold my work before. One of the things that I did was I went on Etsy and I tried to see what sellers were charging for similar items. So, looking up mugs, candles, jewelry, and the like. If you have potters at your studio that you're friends with, you could always ask them what they sell their stuff for or what they might recommend you sell your stuff for. And then speaking of price, I'd recommend that you put a price tag on all of your pieces. That way, when someone comes up to your booth, it's really easy for them to inspect the item for the price without having to ask you. And for total transparency, I wound up selling candles for $40, jewelry for $20, ring dishes for $15, ornaments for $10, and small pots for $5. My next tip is to have signage. So for whatever reason for this market, I really didn't want to commit to a brand name. At my last market, I had called myself Pocket Pottery and I made a logo and materials for that, but I felt like it didn't really fit anymore since I was selling, larger pieces. So I didn't have a sign, and my friend who's coming to the market was like, that just can't fly. So he actually 3D printed me a little sign just with my name on it. And it ended up being the perfect way to complete the table. And ultimately, people do want to know who's making the work, so I would consider your whole branding ahead of time. My last tip is to not be afraid to invite people to the market. Put it on your Instagram story, tell your friends and family about it. I think you'd be surprised how many people genuinely want to come out and support you. And it ended up being so much fun. I went into it feeling really stressed and left feeling like my heart was so full because I got to show all these people who are super important to me a space and a hobby that's super important to me. Alrighty, well, those are my tips for having your first market. If you end up pursuing a market, let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like more beginner pottery content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks!